And we're so honored to have Susan Shaffer here presenting at our summit. I want to share a little bit about Susan before she begins. Susan is president and co-founder of the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium in Maryland. Their mission is to promote excellence and equity in education to achieve social justice. Susan has been working for 4 decades to ensure that public schools have comprehensive technical assistance, training on educational equity, culturally responsive pedagogy and practice, and multicultural gender-related issues. She publishes extensively on gender equity, family engagement, civil rights, multicultural education, and disability. And you can read her full bio on our summit website. So you can go ahead and get started now. Thanks for being here, Susan.
Thank you so much, Meredith. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. Thank you for taking the time and for your commitment to families and to children. As you all know, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, we are all confronting a new reality. Schools and families grappling with how to stay safe, navigating uncertainty, economic insecurity, and keeping kids learning at home and within schools, and questioning what to do next. COVID-19 is shining a spotlight on continuous and new layers of inequities. For example, we know that 20% of African-American families and 21% of families earning less than $40,000 a year have no access to the internet at school. At the same time, we know that people of color are disproportionately suffering and dying of COVID-19. The pandemic and racial injustice gives new meaning to the essential relationship between families, communities, and educators, and that children's learning is and must be a shared responsibility. We must move forward together with grace, adaptation, and flexibility. As one parent said to me just this morning, we have to slow down and surrender. As an Equity Assistance Center, we know that equity is not one and done, but an ongoing process requiring both internal and external reflection. To move forward and benefit all children, families, and educators, we believe that equity must remain at the center of innovation, opportunity, and continuous improvement. Our vision for family engagement is that families, educators, and community members work together as partners, hold themselves mutually accountable, and have the knowledge, skills, and confidence to succeed at improving achievement for all students. Family engagement needs to be more than a series of random acts. It requires a systemic, integrated, and comprehensive approach to working with families in support of children's learning. To reach optimal outcomes for kids, family engagement from an equity perspective is critical. During today's brief presentation, I want to try to provide for you an overview of family engagement from an equity perspective. And I hope you will learn some useful strategies on how to engage racially, linguistically, culturally, and socioeconomically diverse families, and learn how to address the needs of these families by examining assumptions and discussing strategies for two-way partnerships. The Center for Education Equity, as you can see on the slide, is a project of MAEC. We are a mission-driven, 28-year-old nonprofit promoting excellence and equity in education to achieve social justice. Our partners are WestEd and AIR. We serve 15 states and the territories of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, more than 4,500 school districts, including more than 4 million children of color. C, as we call it, is one of 4 regional equity assistance centers funded by the U.S. Department of Education under Title IV of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The EACs hold a unique position of focusing our work on civil rights considerations and implications in the public K through 12 space. We are not an enforcement agency. We help build capacity for non-discriminatory policies and practices. And at the end of the presentation, I have a list of EACs that respond to every state in the country and territories. But again, if you need any help and you want assistance, even if you send to in region 1, even if you send a request to our region, we will get it to the right region representing your state. I want to also tell you that, like our colleagues who are hosting the Leadership Summit today, MAEC also houses a statewide family engagement center, Collaborative Action for Family Engagement, better known as CAFE. We serve the states of Maryland and Pennsylvania. The next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to try an icebreaker. What I'd like you to do is think about sort of taking a moment about thinking about where you grew up, and answer the following questions. Would you describe the places where you grew up as diverse? And how do you think that it impacted you? And if you could use, I was wondering, Meredith, if there are 20 or 25 people, however many participants, can we get them so that we can maybe have a discussion about it once they think about it?
Sure. So
Okay.
I'm hoping that you're able to unmute your microphones and even maybe turn on your cameras and respond to Susan's question. Looks like some people are unmuting, so.
Great.
Lisa or Monique, would you like to share?
I will. Where I grew up was not diverse, and it impacted me in a way that kind of prevented me from really thinking about what diversity was early in life. So it's been a learning process ever since I kind of had that realization that, oh, I am completely lacking in that area, so, of understanding. So, yeah.
I think the important thing that you're saying, Lisa, is that you are explicitly trying to understand and learn from that experience.
Yes.
And reflect on how it impacts the decisions you make, your interactions, and your worldview, the lens you use in order to make that decision. So that kind of intentionality, again, even for those of us that have been in this work I've been doing this work for more than 40 years, as Meredith told everybody, over 4 decades. It is a work in progress. It is a work in progress. So all of us appreciate that there are folks like you who understand that and are willing to continue to work on it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Others? Monique?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in New York City, and I don't think there's any place in the world that's more diverse than New York City. So I grew up with the ability and the understanding of the importance of accepting people and being aware that there are a lot of differences in people, and just being able to interact regardless of what I or others may view as being different or diverse. So I think I come to this work with, a huge amount of experience of working with and being around people who spoke languages that I couldn't decipher, and who looked differently than I or many of my peers. So I think that puts me in a really good place in terms of doing any work around diversity.
What I love about what you're saying, Monique, is that you look at diversity as an asset, not a deficit. And that's That's really the only way that we can move forward with any kind of common understanding. So that's wonderful. All right, we'll take one more. If you could share, someone else willing to share?
Looks like we have a couple people sharing in the chat.
Okay.
Megan shares that she did not grow up in a diverse area. She's since moved to Cleveland, which is much more diverse. And she's tried to raise her children to recognize diversity. And her educational career has taken her into the world of special education and now in an urban environment using culturally responsive teaching.
So what I love about what she's saying is that it starts with children, that we know that children are not born hateful. They're not born with biases, that those are learned and they can be unlearned. So that's really, really important in terms of teaching and also the way in which that we raise our own family. So thank you for that. Okay. Thank you, everybody. And again, this is again the kind of lens that we all use in order to both ask questions, how we teach, how we interact, as well as how we feel about folks when we meet people who are different from us. So what are the goals of educational equity? Before I go over this, I want to give you sort of the undergirding of equity, at least the way we look at it, that equity is built on three salient dimensions. The first one is that it removes the predictability of academic success or failure based on the learner's race, gender, national origin, religious, economic level, linguistic background, or physical ability. The second is, and you probably heard this in sort of the language that's going on around and the discussions that are going on around equity, is that it interrupts or disrupts inequitable practices, eliminating biases and oppression and creating inclusive school environments for adults and for children. And the third dimension is it enables us to discover and cultivate the unique gifts, talents, and interests that each human being possesses. So this is the undergirding of these goals. The goals of equity are high achievement and positive outcomes for all students, equitable access and inclusion, equitable treatment, equitable resource distribution, again versus equal distribution, equitable opportunity to learn, and shared accountability. And it enables equitable treatment, where we ensure that interactions are characterized by acceptance, respect, support, and safety. And this is a shared accountability where educators at every level take responsibility for equitable, positive academic outcomes for all students. Okay, next slide. So what does it mean to be culturally responsive? And I want you to think about this in relationship to students, educators, and any adult that comes into contact and is important to children. So first of all, it is a way of being, a mindset that affirms one's own culture while positively engaging with those cultures different from our own. I want to remind you that it is human, and I'll quote, that we do not describe the world we see what we know how to describe. But by seeking to understand others, we are better able to establish common ground. We are able to cultivate a vision of what is possible for all children. And we can only operationalize equity practices by situating learning in the lives of students and families. Second, it takes into consideration the differences between cultures viewing diversity as a benefit and interacting knowledgeably and respectfully among a variety of cultural groups. So this employs an asset-based approach that affirms the funds of knowledge, the power, potential, resourcefulness, and resilience of diverse populations. We move from a deficit-based to an asset-based, which requires establishing environments and program cultures in which all families are valued and supported to develop intentional and active engagement in children's care and educational settings. Finally, it is the mediating lens through which we make sense of the world and our lived experiences. So we promote the voices from within the cultural community itself as the greatest source of expertise. So these raise questions as, what does it mean to be culturally responsive, and why does it matter? How might the way in which we perceive students impact their behavior? And what are we prepared to do better in the days, months, years that follow? And again, as I said before, this is a work in progress. We are flying as we are building that airplane, because there is no place where there is no bias, no racism, no sexism, no ableism. So we are doing this at the same time that we are continuing to practice these kinds of strategies. So as educators, we intentionally take into account the socio-political issues that affect students and their families at each developmental stage of their lives, and that we commit, and you heard from previous participants, to initiate transformative changes in practice and decision-making with explicit intent of improving the educational experiences and lives of diverse families and their children. Families are the first line of defense. When educators and learners are responsive, the culture that children bring to school serves as an important, essential resource. How are students and families' strength, both in terms of process and content knowledge, disposition and interest, leveraged in instruction? In what ways are students and families encouraged to understand their own strengths and tendencies as learners? The students' and families' funds of knowledge are valued and affirmed, in contrast to, unfortunately, the experiences of many, both current and previous generations, where these families are often distorted, marginalized, or even brutalized. As educational leaders, socio-political issues that impact student lives must be considered. With this perspective, there is a likelihood of a commitment to initiating structural changes that will positively impact the lives and educational experiences of learners from a diverse group and benefit the entire school, the district, our communities, and our country. Okay. So, culturally responsive family engagement. So, what does it do? It strengthens the family-child bond and acknowledges the role of family as children's first and most important teacher. And boy, are we learning lessons from that right now. It seeks to understand culture again. Oh my God. I apologize. Seeks to understand culture as an asset that helps connect children to learning. It builds trust by sharing knowledge and power between families and education. This is an authentic partnership. This isn't something we just talk about, but something that we intentionally practice. And it meets families where they are. It, again, intentional and explicit. Okay. So working from a culturally responsive perspective to build authentic two-way partnership. These are the 4 E's: exploration, expectation, education, and empowerment. Never have these 4 E's been more important than what we are currently experiencing. Every school district wishes they had built these partnerships for learning as they moved from school to distance learning, and now to virtual and or hybrid learning, and some children who are actually in school today. Parents must be full decision makers and partners in the education of their children. So exploration, we identify and describe culturally based practices and resources from diverse perspectives. And they integrate and explore and into the experience of children in their learning environment. So you use these practices to actually transform the learning experience for children. We expect that diverse families will be intentionally and proactively engaged in their children's learning and school experiences by providing ways for participation that are responsive to the context and benefits for these families. And that we teach families about the educational system. We can't assume that everybody has the same knowledge, certainly English learners, newcomers. We need to make sure that we are on the same page, that they understand milestones, they understand key agencies and administrators, interpreting school data to help them advocate effectively for their children. And again, I can't emphasize enough how significant this is right now. Without this family education partnership, there is very little chance we're going to get through this successfully. And finally, that we empower families with tools they need to support and advocate as authentic partners in the education of their children. And before I go over these core values, I was listening to a webinar this week for newcomers, English learners, and English learners with suspected disabilities. And one of the presenters said something that resonated with me that I want to share with all of you. That during this incredibly challenging, unprecedented time, I want to give you the space to be able to do what is reasonable for both families and educators. And I think that if we do this with grace and we do this with adaptation and flexibility, that we will foster the kind of courageous learning spaces that create brave communities, because we so desperately need that now. So I want to leave you with this quote from Gary Howard that I love, and I think it sums up some of the context that I gave you around high impact, culturally responsive family engagement, and how equity needs to be a part of everything that we do in order to be able to provide children and families with what they actually need. Listen beneath the words, read between the lines, speak from your experience, assumptions. Basically, peel assumptions. Basically, don't make assumptions. Engage in multiple perspectives. Not in my way is the only way. Suspend defensive reactions. Embrace ambiguity and uncertainty. Be open to new things. Invite deeper connections. Be open to people. Expect new learning. And create alternatives for action and change. Next slide. So these are the regional equity assistance centers. These are their content information. These are the states and territories that they serve. Again, please don't hesitate to contact us for your needs around educational equity and culturally responsive education. Okay, next. And this is contact information. These are some of my staff members and some of the children that we've worked with in the past. Please feel free to go to our website, follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. We have some amazing resources that deal with racial justice, that deal with COVID-19, that are targeted to homeless populations, English learners, students with disabilities, and I think will be very, very helpful. It's updated continuously. We also have a map that I think would be really interesting for the entire country on what state departments of education are offering in terms of their newest policies around the school reopenings, what is going on in each of the districts, as well as nutrition information and economic information for families so that it's a one-stop shop. So thank you very much for giving me this time to give you a brief overview of MAEC's perspective around culturally responsive family engagement. Meredith?
Thank you, Susan, for sharing your time and your knowledge with us today. Lots of great ideas and resources shared. Please join me in thanking Susan in the chat, and remember to visit our social media to share about what you're learning today. And especially thank you to our attendees. Feel free to reach out to me or other staff members at any time with questions or just to talk about what's going on in your community in the area of family engagement. To talk about what culturally responsive work looks like in your community and how we can better represent that work on our website and in future trainings. We really enjoy our work and we want to be useful to you in your role as a family engagement leader. So I'm going to stop sharing now and just open up the floor for questions. Or questions or comments or anything you want to share with Susan now at this point. Turn on your camera, unmute.
Deborah's talking, but I don't hear her.
Ah.
Hi, Susan. Just want to say hello.
Deborah. Speaking about a leader in the field, what questions could you possibly have for me, Deborah?
Well, I guess my questions are usually where are the places where this work is happening? And, you know, more about what kinds of results these schools, districts, professionals are having because of their commitment to these values and to this kind of work.
That's a great question. I think what we're seeing is that because of the spotlight really on racial injustice, I mean, we know that these inequities have been around for a very long time. They don't just happen overnight. But now we have a spotlight on them. And so what I feel optimistic about, I guess, if there's any optimism, given with everything that's going on, is that people are searching. People want to become more knowledgeable about equity, about other folks, about how they can sort of open their minds to the greater good. And I think if we have that lens and we're mindful about that, that I feel that we can make a difference. I think that, Deborah, we have still a long way to go because at the same time, I'm seeing equity used as sort of a buzzword with not really a great understanding of what it means. This is hard work. This is changing mindsets. This is also understanding that mindsets are pliable, that people can learn and relearn. And what we've seen, I'll use Maine as a state. We started out working in districts, doing system-wide transformative work with needs assessments, looking at data together, co-collaborating on new programs. And from those districts, the State Department now wants to do an equity audit for the entire state. They have a new governor, they have a new Secretary of Education, and they are committed to look at how their divisions are looking at equity. To me, that is incredibly positive.
That's incredible. Yeah.
Because you and I both know, and others who've been in this work for a long time, that we need those structural changes. Those systemic changes can't happen piecemeal. It has to be structural, and we have to go down to the foundation. So seeing whole states and you wouldn't expect that Maine would be one of them. And I know that my colleagues across the country who are doing this work could also provide you with other examples. So that to me is very positive. As long as people are willing to listen and they're willing to understand that this is intentional work and that you've got to be in for the long haul. This is not anything that's going to be fixed overnight.